The Carver family cemetery, tucked into the rolling hills of upstate New York, was a place of quiet reverence, its ancient oaks standing like sentinels over polished granite headstones. On this gray October morning, a sharp autumn chill hung in the air, and the mourners gathered in a somber semicircle around a gleaming mahogany casket. Henry Carver, the titan of Carver Enterprises, was dead at 71. His empire-spanning tech innovation, real estate, and renewable energy had made him a legend. Still, to his son, James Carver, he was something else entirely. A taskmaster, a strategist, a man who forged his only child into a weapon rather than a son. James stood at the edge of the gathering, a tall, broad-shouldered figure at 32, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the casket. His tailored black overcoat did little to shield him from the biting wind or the moment's weight. The carved headstone read, Henry Carver, 1952-2023, visionary leader, father. The words felt hollow to James, like a press release etched in stone. He hadn't cried, not when the call came from the hospital, not during the long night of paperwork, and not now. He'd learned long ago that grief was a luxury Henry Carver didn't permit. From childhood, James has been groomed to this day. Henry's lessons were relentless boardroom tactics, before bedtime stories, market analysis over family dinners. 10. James was reciting profit margins. At 16, he was shadowing executives. By 25, he was running entire divisions of Carver Enterprises. Henry called it preparation. James called it programming. Affection was a foreign language in their house, replaced by expectations that pressed against James's chest like a vice. Now, with Henry gone, the empire was his along with its burdens. The mourners, a mix of board members, distant relatives, and society elites, murmured prayers as the priest spoke of legacy. James's mother, Margaret, stood nearby, her silver hair immaculate, her posture regal despite the fatigue in her eyes. She had been Henry's silent partner, navigating his world with grace and pragmatism. As the casket was lowered, she approached James, slipping her hand through his arm. "Your father expected strength," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent upholding the Carver name. James didn't respond. Strength was all he'd ever given, but it never felt like enough. Inside, he was a tangle of duty and defiance. He'd spent his life chasing Henry's approval, only to inherit a throne that felt more like a cage. The mourners began to drift away, their black umbrellas bobbing toward the fleet of sleek cars parked along the estate's drive. James remained, watching the groundskeepers lower the casket into the earth. It was mechanical, final, like signing a contract. He wondered if Henry had ever seen him as more than an asset. Margaret lingered, her hand still on his arm. She said, "There's a meeting tonight," her tone shifting to business. "The solicitor needs to speak with you. It's important." James's jaw tightened. "Can't it wait?" "No," she replied, her eyes steady. "Your father left instructions. You know how he was." "He did." Henry Carver planned everything down to the last detail. Even in death, James could feel his father's hand steering him. He nodded curtly, and Margaret gently squeezed his arm before walking toward the main house, her heels clicking on the stone path. James stayed a moment longer, the wind tugging at his coat. He wasn't mourning Henry. He was bracing for whatever came next. That evening, the Carver mansion glowed against the darkening sky, its sprawling stone facade a monument to wealth and power. Inside the library was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound books, the air thick with the scent of polished oak and old money. James sat at the head of a long table, his tie loosened, a glass of bourbon untouched before him. Margaret sat to his right, her expression unreadable. Across from them was Mr. Ellis, the family solicitor, a wiry man with graying hair and a clipped New England accent. He adjusted his glasses and opened a leather portfolio, his movements precise. James Ellis began. Your father's will is straightforward in most respects. Carver Enterprises properties, shares, and operational control pass to you effective immediately. He paused, glancing at Margaret, then back at James. But there's a specific directive that requires your attention. James leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Let me guess something designed to keep me on a leash. Ellis didn't flinch. Your father secured a strategic partnership with the media and telecommunications conglomerate Johnson Group. To maintain it, he committed to an alliance through marriage between you and Amara Johnson, the designated heir. The room went still. James laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You're joking. I'm not, Ellis said, sliding a document across the table. This memorandum, signed 5 years ago and updated last spring, stipulates that the marriage must occur within 30 days of Henry's death. If it doesn't, the Johnson Group will withdraw from all joint ventures, costing Carver Enterprises billions and jeopardizing thousands of jobs. James's hand froze on the table. This is wild. He's using my life as a bargaining chip. Margaret's voice cut through, calm but firm. It's not just about you, James. This is about preserving what your grandfather built from nothing, about the people who depend on us. And what about me? James stood, his chair scraping against the floor. What about what I want? I don't even know this woman. For all I know, she's a stranger who's been bought into this as much as I have. You'll meet her tomorrow, Ellis said, glancing at his watch. She and a representative from the Johnson family arrive at noon. James stared at him, his pulse pounding. Even from the grave, Henry was dictating his future. He turned to Margaret, searching for an ally, but her expression was resolute. He planned for stability, she said. What you make of it is up to you. James ran a hand through his dark blonde hair, his mind racing. He'd spent his life bending to Henry's will, but this felt like a betrayal too far. Marriage wasn't a contract. It was personal. Yet the numbers were undeniable: billions in revenue, thousands of livelihoods. He could hear Henry's voice in his head. Emotion is weakness. Duty is strength. But for the first time, James wondered if strength meant surrender. He sank back into his chair, the bourbon glass cold against his palm. Fine, he said, his voice low. I'll meet her, but don't expect me to like it. Margaret's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Ellis closed his portfolio with a snap. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting shadows across the room. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the promise of a storm. James stared into the flames, his thoughts a tangle of anger, duty, and something he couldn't name, a flicker of curiosity about the woman who would soon walk into his life, and the future neither of them had chosen. The library of the Carver mansion was a fortress of silence that evening, its towering bookshelves casting long shadows under the glow of a crystal chandelier. James Carver sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his fingers tracing the rim of his untouched bourbon glass. The fire in the hearth crackled, but it did little to warm the chill that had settled in his chest since the funeral. Across from him, Mr. Ellis, the family solicitor, arranged a stack of documents with the precision of a surgeon. Margaret, James's mother, sat to his right, her hands folded neatly, her face a mask of composure. The air was heavy, not just with the scent of aged leather and wood polish, but with the weight of what was to come. James shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. He said, "Let's get this over with." His voice low, edged with impatience. He'd spent the day replaying the funeral, Henry's headstone, and the suffocating sense of a life scripted by someone else. Whatever his father had planned, James braced for another chain to tighten around him. Ellis cleared his throat, his glasses glinting, as he opened a leather portfolio. As I mentioned, James, The bulk of your father's will is straightforward. Carver Enterprises, its assets, subsidiaries, and operational control passes to you. The properties including this estate are yours, as are the investment portfolios. He paused, his eyes flicking to Margaret, then back to James. However, there's a clause that requires immediate attention. It concerns a strategic partnership with the Johnson Group. James raised a brow, leaning back. The media conglomerate. What about it? The Johnson Group was a powerhouse dominating telecom and digital media, with deep roots in urban markets and a reputation for innovation. Henry had mentioned the partnership in passing, but always with a vagueness that James now realized was deliberate. Ellis slid a document across the table, its pages crisp and official. Your father signed a confidential memorandum with the Johnson family 5 years ago. It was updated last spring. To secure the partnership, which includes joint ventures in streaming platforms, 5G infrastructure, and content production, Henry committed to an alliance sealed by marriage between you and Amara Johnson, the designated heir of the Johnson Group. The words landed like a punch. James froze his hand, gripping the armrest. Marriage. His laugh was sharp, almost a bark. You're telling me my father sold me off to close a deal? It's not that simple. Ellis said, his tone steady. The partnership is worth billions. If the marriage doesn't occur within 30 days of Henry's death, the Johnson Group will withdraw. The fallout would collapse key projects, cost thousands of jobs, and destabilize Carver Enterprises' market position. James stood, his chair scraping against the floor. This is blackmail. He's using my life as a bargaining chip. His voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings. He turned to Margaret, searching for an ally. Did you know about this? Margaret's eyes met his, calm but unyielding. Your father saw the long game, James. This isn't just about you. It's about preserving an empire your grandfather built from a single patent. It's about the employees, the shareholders, the communities that depend on us. And what about me? James snapped, pacing to the fireplace. The flames flickered, mirroring the anger surging through him. What about what I want? I don't even know this Amara Johnson. For all I know, she's as trapped in this as I am, or worse, complicit. He ran a hand through his dark blonde hair, his mind racing. Henry had always been a chess master, moving pieces without consulting the board. But this was personal. Ellis adjusted his glasses, unfazed. Amara Johnson is the only child of Marcus Johnson, the group's founder. She's been groomed to lead much like you. The memorandum ensures mutual benefit. Carver Enterprises gains media dominance, and the Johnson Group gains tech infrastructure. The marriage is the linchpin. James stopped, pacing, his back to the room. A linchpin, he muttered bitterly. That's all I am to him. A tool. He thought of his childhood, the endless lessons in strategy, the absence of warmth. Henry had never asked what James wanted. Not at 10, not at 20, not now. Love, freedom, and choice were fairy tales in the Carver world. Duty was the only currency that mattered. Margaret's voice softened, but it carried steel. Your father didn't believe in fairy tales, James. He believed in legacy. You think this is beneath you, but it's bigger than you. The Johnson partnership could redefine industries and create opportunities for millions. You have a responsibility. Responsibility, James echoed, turning to face her. That's all I've ever had. When do I get to be more than Henry's puppet? His words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. He saw a flicker of sympathy in Margaret's eyes for a moment, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Ellis broke the silence, glancing at his watch. You'll meet her tomorrow. Amara and a representative from the Johnson family arrive at noon. They've requested a private discussion in the drawing room. James stared at him, his pulse pounding. Even in death, Henry's control was absolute. He imagined Amara Johnson, a faceless name, a stranger tied to him by his father's pen. Was she a willing participant, eager to merge empires? Or was she like him, a reluctant pawn? The uncertainty gnawed at him, mingling with his anger. He wanted to fight to tear the document to shreds, but the numbers were stark: billions in revenue, thousands of livelihoods. He could hear Henry's voice. Sacrifice for the greater good. He sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him. Delicate, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. I'll meet her, but don't expect me to roll over like a good soldier. Margaret's expression softened, but she said nothing. Ellis closed his portfolio with a quiet snap, the sound final, like a gavel. The fire popped in the hearth, sending sparks up the chimney. James stared into his bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light. His mind churned with questions about Amara Johnson. Who was she? Why had Henry chosen her? And why did a small, rebellious part of him wonder what she might be like? Outside, the October wind rattled the mansion's windows, carrying the promise of change or a storm. James didn't know which, but as he sat in the silence of his father's library, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. Tomorrow, he'd face the woman who held the key to his future and the weight of a legacy he wasn't sure he wanted. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of the Carver mansion's east wing, casting soft golden streaks across the dark hardwood floors. James Carver stood by the tall window of his bedroom, his reflection sharp in a tailored navy suit, though his tie hung loose, a small act of defiance against the day's expectations. Sleep had been fleeting his mind, tangled with anger and questions about the woman he would meet at noon. Amara Johnson, the stranger his father had bound him to. The weight of Henry Carver's will pressed harder now, a noose tightening with each tick of the clock. James glanced at his watch, 11:45. Downstairs, the staff bustled with practiced efficiency, preparing the drawing room for the Johnson family's arrival. Fresh lilies adorned the tables, silver trays gleamed with imported teas, and the air carried the faint scent of lemon polish. It was pageantry, James thought bitterly, a stage set for a deal disguised as diplomacy. He straightened his tie, his jaw tight, and headed down the grand staircase, each step echoing like a countdown. In the drawing room, Margaret waited, her posture impeccable in a charcoal dress. "Be civil," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is bigger than your pride." James's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Civility is the least of my problems." He crossed his arms, leaning against the mantelpiece, eyes scanning the room. The space was elegant cream walls, gilded frames, a Steinway piano in the corner, but it felt like a boardroom, not a home. He wondered what Amara Johnson would make of this cold monument to wealth. Would she be impressed, indifferent, or as resentful as he was? At precisely noon, the rumble of tires on gravel announced the guest's arrival. James moved to the window, peering through the lace curtains. A sleek black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop in the circular driveway. The driver opened the rear door, and a woman stepped out first, tall, poised in a vibrant teal dress that flowed to her ankles, its high neck and long sleeves exuding understated elegance. Her face was entirely concealed by a sheer black veil pinned delicately at her shoulder. Behind her emerged a middle-aged woman in a tailored suit, her dark skin glowing under the sunlight, her demeanor warm but authoritative. James's stomach tightened. The veiled woman was Amara, no doubt. The veil was unexpected, a puzzle that sparked both curiosity and irritation. Was it cultural, personal? A statement? He pushed the questions aside, steeling himself for the encounter. Margaret greeted the guests at the door, her voice smooth as silk. "Welcome to Carver House. I'm Margaret Carver. My son James is inside." The older woman smiled, extending a hand. "Denise Johnson, Amara's aunt. Thank you for hosting us." Her accent was crisp, with a hint of Harlem's cadence, polished by years in diplomatic circles. Amara said nothing, her veiled head inclining slightly in acknowledgement. Her steps were soundless, her posture regal, as if the room bent to her presence. They entered the drawing room, and James stepped forward, his expression guarded. "James Carver," he said, offering a curt nod. His eyes locked on Amara, searching for clues beneath the veil, but the fabric revealed only the faint outline of her features. Her eyes, dark and steady, met his through the sheer black, unflinching. "Amara Johnson," she replied, her voice low, precise, with a warmth that caught him off guard. She extended a gloved hand, and he shook it briefly, her grip firm but measured. Denise sat beside Margaret, launching into pleasantries about the estate, but James barely listened. His attention was on Amara, who sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, her stillness almost unnerving. Denise spoke first, her tone diplomatic. "The partnership between our families is a legacy of vision. Marcus, my brother, and Henry built this alliance on trust. Amara and James, you're the future of that trust." James's jaw clenched. Trust. This was coercion, not collaboration. He leaned forward, his voice clipped. "No offense, Ms. Johnson, but I don't know your niece. I don't understand why my father thought this." He gestured vaguely between himself and Amara was the key to anything. Denise's smile didn't waver. "Fair enough. Amara is brilliant, strategic, and fiercely loyal to our family's mission. She's been running our digital media division since she was 25. I suspect you'll find common ground." Amara remained silent, her eyes fixed on James. He shifted, uncomfortable under her gaze. "And the veil?" He asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Is that part of the mission too?" Margaret's breath caught, but Amara didn't flinch. "It's my choice," she said, her voice steady, neither defensive nor apologetic. "It's how I present myself. Does it bother you?" James blinked, caught off balance. "It's unusual." He admitted, his tone softer now, though his frustration lingered. "People will talk. They always do." Amara replied, a faint edge of amusement in her voice. She tilted her head slightly as if studying him. "The question is whether you care." The room fell quiet, the weight of her words settling over them. Denise smoothly redirected the conversation to logistics, timelines, legal documents, but James's mind was elsewhere. Amara's response had been a challenge, subtle but unmistakable. She wasn't here to appease him, which both intrigued and irritated him. Denise presented a small velvet box, sliding it toward James. "A token of our commitment," she said. Inside was a pendant carved from ebony and inlaid with silver, its design intricate yet bold. "For the engagement," she added. James accepted it stiffly, his fingers brushing the smooth wood. "Thank you," he said, though the words felt hollow. The meeting ended with polite nods and promises to reconvene. Amara rose, her movements graceful, and followed Denise to the door. She paused, glancing back at James. "Until next time," she said, her voice carrying a quiet promise. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away, James stood by the window, the pendant heavy in his hand. Margaret approached, her voice low. "You could have been kinder. She's a stranger," he snapped, turning to face her. "And that veil, what's she hiding? This whole thing feels like a performance." Margaret sighed. "Or maybe she's protecting something. Give her a chance, James. You might be surprised." He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the empty driveway. Amara Johnson was no pawn. She carried herself with a strength that rivaled his own. But the veil, her silence, her unflappable calm, were a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. Part of him wanted to dismiss her, to fight this arrangement with every ounce of his will. But another small and unbidden part wondered who she was beneath the veil and why Henry had chosen her. In his study, James tossed the pendant onto his desk and poured a whiskey. He stared at a framed photo of Henry, his father's stern face, a reminder of the control that still bound him. "You win this round," he muttered, raising his glass. But as the liquor burned his throat, he couldn't shake the image of Amara's eyes, steady and unyielding, or the feeling that this meeting had changed something he couldn't yet name. The Carver estate's sprawling lawn was transformed into a vision of restrained elegance under a crisp October sky. Rows of white chairs, draped in ivory silk, faced a simple arch, woven with pale roses and eucalyptus. The guest list was small, close family keyboard members and a handful of trusted allies, each face a mask of polite anticipation. James Carver stood beneath the arch, his black tuxedo impeccable, his expression carved from stone. At 32, he was no stranger to high-stakes moments, but this one felt like a transaction, not a triumph. Today, he would marry Amara Johnson, a woman he'd met only once, bound by his late father's will to save an empire. The past 10 days had blurred into a haze of legal meetings, fittings, and terse exchanges with his mother Margaret, who insisted on a private ceremony to avoid media scrutiny. James had complied not out of agreement, but exhaustion. The pendant from Amara's Aunt Denise sat heavy in his pocket, a reminder of the deal he couldn't escape. He'd replayed their first meeting endlessly. Amara's veiled face, steady eyes, and cryptic, "It's my choice." She was a puzzle he didn't want to solve yet. Her calm defiance lingered in his mind, a thorn he couldn't dislodge. The soft hum of a string quartet signaled the start. James's pulse quickened as heads turned toward the stone path. Amara appeared to be a vision in white silk, her gown flowing like water, its high neck and long sleeves echoing the elegance of their first encounter. The black veil, sheer but opaque, still concealed her face, fluttering lightly in the breeze. She walked alone, her steps measured, her posture unbroken by the moment's weight. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Curiosity, judgment, speculation. But Amara seemed untouched, a statue moving through a storm. She reached the arch, standing opposite James. The officiant, a silver-haired judge with a gentle voice, began the vows. James spoke his words mechanical. "I, James, take you, Amara, to be my wife." Each syllable felt like a contract clause binding him to a future he hadn't chosen. Amara's voice followed, clear and unwavering. "I, Amara, take you, James." Her tone held no hesitation, only a quiet resolve that tightened James's chest. Was she here willingly, or was she a prisoner of duty like him? The judge nodded. "You may kiss the bride." James hesitated, his eyes locking on the veil. The crowd held its breath. He leaned forward, his lips brushing the chiffon over her cheek, the fabric cool and impersonal. No warmth, no connection, just a gesture to seal the deal. Amara didn't flinch, her stillness a wall he couldn't breach. The guests clapped, a polite, muted sound that faded quickly into the wind. The ceremony ended, and the small crowd approached the mansion for a brief reception. James and Amara posed for a single photograph, standing side by side, his hand resting lightly on her arm. Sensing the tension, the photographer didn't ask for a second shot. James's jaw clenched as he glanced at Amara, her veiled face unreadable. "Congratulations," he muttered, the word tasting like ash. She inclined her head. To us, she replied, her voice soft, but with a trace of something, irony perhaps, or challenge. Before he could respond, she turned to greet Denise, leaving him standing alone. The reception was held in the mansion's dining hall, its long table adorned with white orchids and candlelight. Guests spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to Amara, who sat beside James, her plate untouched. She nodded politely at compliments, her responses brief but gracious. James sipped his champagne, his mind elsewhere. He caught snippets of conversation. Why the veil? Is it a cultural thing? Maybe she's shy, and his grip tightened on the glass. He wanted to snap at them to demand they mind their own business. But what would he say? He knew as little as they did. A butler approached as the evening wound down, murmuring that their private suite was ready. James stood, offering his arm out of habit. Amara accepted it, her touch light, and they left the hall. The rustle of her gown the only sound in the corridor. The mansion's northern wing suite was lavish tall windows, a four-poster bed draped in cream gauze, a fireplace glowing softly. A tray of chocolates and wine sat on a marble table untouched. James entered first, tossing his jacket onto a chair. Amara followed, closing the door with a quiet click. He turned to face her, the day's tension boiling over. "Are you going to keep that on forever?" he asked, nodding at the veil, his voice sharper than intended. Amara paused, removing her gloves with deliberate care. "Until I'm ready," she said, her tone even as if his frustration was a breeze she could ignore. She set the gloves on a vanity, her movements precise. James laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Ready for what?" "To stop playing this game. I'm the one standing next to a bride no one can see. Do you know what that feels like?" She turned, her eyes visible through the veil, dark and piercing. "I know what it feels like to be judged." "James, the veil isn't about you." Her words were calm, but they carried a weight that silenced him. She stepped toward the vanity, unpinning a small brooch from her gown, her back to him. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his anger deflating into something heavier. Confusion, perhaps, or guilt. "Fine," he said, softer now. "Keep your secrets. But don't expect me to play along forever." Amara didn't respond. She seated herself at the vanity, brushing her hair beneath the veil, each stroke methodical. James watched for a moment, his chest tight with resentment and curiosity. Who was this woman so composed in the face of his turmoil? He poured a glass of whiskey from the tray, downed it in one gulp, and crossed to the far side of the suite. The bed loomed between them, a chasm neither would cross. That night, they slept on opposite sides of the room. James on a leather chaise, Amara in the bed, her silhouette barely visible through the gauze. The fire's glow faded to embers, and the silence grew louder than their vows. James stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying her words. "The veil isn't about you." For the first time, he wondered if she was protecting something, not hiding it. But the thought only deepened his unease. He was married to a stranger, and the weight of that truth pressed harder than his father's will. The days following the wedding settled into a rhythm of uneasy coexistence at the Carver mansion, a vast stone edifice that felt more like a museum than a home. James Carver threw himself into work, retreating to his office at dawn and returning long after dusk. Carver Enterprises demanded his attention, mergers, board meetings, market forecasts, and he welcomed the distraction. It was easier to bury himself in spreadsheets than to face the stranger he'd married, Amara Johnson, whose presence lingered like a shadow he couldn't quite grasp. Amara, for her part, kept her distance. She didn't seek James out or impose herself on his routines, yet her influence was undeniable. The mansion, once a place of quiet disarray, staff scrambling, schedules slipping, began to hum with newfound precision. The kitchens ran like clockwork meals, arriving promptly, each dish a balance of flavor and elegance. Long neglected gardens bloomed with fresh plantings, their paths swept clean. Even the library, a dusty relic of Henry Carver's era, gleamed its shelves, organized its leather-bound tomes, dusted and aligned. James noticed these changes in passing, like a man catching glimpses of a painting he hadn't meant to admire. One morning, as he hurried through the foyer with a cup of black coffee, James overheard Amara speaking to the housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, near the staircase. Her voice was soft but firm, like a conductor guiding an orchestra. She said the linens need to be rotated weekly, not monthly, holding a small notepad. Let's ensure the heating is checked before winter sets in for the guest suites. Mrs. Ellis nodded, her usual harried expression, replaced by one of focus, even respect. Amara glanced up, catching James's eye. She inclined her head, the black veil shifting slightly, and said, "Good morning, James." Her tone was polite and neutral, as if they were colleagues, not spouses. "Morning," he muttered, nodding back before striding toward his office. The exchange lingered, though her calm authority gnawing at him. Who was she to step into his home and reorder it? Yet he couldn't deny the results. The mansion felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on a stack of contracts. But Amara's steady and sure voice echoed in his mind. That evening, James returned late, the sky deep indigo beyond the mansion's windows. He found himself in the dining hall, a solitary figure at a table meant for 20. The staff had left a plate of roasted salmon and asparagus, still warm, a small gesture of care he hadn't expected. As he ate, he noticed a vase of fresh lilies on the sideboard, their scent subtle but grounding. He hadn't seen flowers in the house since childhood, when his mother still cared about such things. Was this Amara's doing too? His thoughts were interrupted by the soft click of heels. Amara entered, her silhouette, framed by the doorway, the veil still in place, though lighter now, a delicate chiffon that hinted at the curve of her jaw. She carried a book, its cover worn, and paused when she saw him. "I didn't expect you here," she said, her voice even not unkind. "Long day," James replied, setting down his fork. "You—" She hesitated, then crossed to a chair opposite him, placing the book on the table and reviewing the household accounts. There were inefficiencies. Her gloved fingers tapped the book lightly, a gesture that felt deliberate and unconscious. James raised a brow. "You're managing the house now. Someone has to," she said, a faint edge of amusement in her tone. "It's not just about aesthetics, James. A home sets the tone for everything else." He leaned back, studying her. The veil frustrated him, a barrier he couldn't cross, but her words carried a weight he couldn't dismiss. "Do you know what this place needs?" "I know what it could be," she replied, her eyes meeting his through the fabric. "A place like this, it's more than walls. It's a legacy. Your legacy." The words stung, conjuring Henry's voice, his father's relentless lessons about duty. James's jaw tightened. "Legacy," he said bitterly. "That's why we're here, pawns in my father's game." Amara tilted her head, considering him. "Maybe, but pawns can become queens if they play the board right." She rose, picking up her book. "Good night, James." He watched her leave, her words lingering like a challenge. Queens. Was she mocking him, or was she seeing something he couldn't? He downed the rest of his wine, the glass cold against his palm, and stared at the empty doorway. For the first time, he wondered if Amara was more than a mystery, if she was a force he'd underestimated. James passed her again the next day, this time in the garden. She was speaking to the groundskeeper, gesturing toward a row of rose bushes, her notepad in hand. Her veil fluttered in the breeze, and her posture was relaxed, yet commanding. The groundskeeper nodded, jotting down her instructions. His usual gruffness softened. Amara glanced at James, offering a slight nod. He returned it, his steps slowing as he walked on. The roses, he noticed, were thriving, their blooms a vivid red against the autumn chill. James tried to focus in his office, but his mind kept drifting. Amara's influence was everywhere, subtle, deliberate, effective. She wasn't loud, wasn't demanding, yet the mansion bent to her will. It irritated him, this quiet power she wielded, but it also intrigued him. He'd been raised to command through force like Henry, yet Amara led with something else, precision perhaps, or care. He hated admitting it, but the house felt better for it. That night, unable to sleep, James wandered to the library. The room was dimly lit, the fire low. Amara was there, seated by a window, reading. She looked up, her veil catching the firelight. "Can't sleep?" she asked, closing her book. "Too much on my mind," he said, hovering near the door. "You." "The same," she replied. Her voice softer now. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Join me." He hesitated, then sat, the leather creaking under his weight. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but heavy. "You're changing things," he said finally, nodding toward the shelves. "The house. It's different." Amara's eyes crinkled slightly, a hint of a smile. "Is that a complaint?" "No," he admitted, surprising himself. "It's just, I didn't expect it." "You're not what I expected." She leaned back, studying him. "And what did you expect, James? A trophy? A liability?" He flinched, her directness cutting through his defenses. "I don't know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't ask for this. For you." "Neither did I," she said quietly. "But here we are." The words hung between them, raw and honest. James felt a pang, not of anger, but of recognition. She was trapped too, yet she carried herself with a grace he couldn't muster. He wanted to ask about the veil, about her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood nodding stiffly. "Good night, Amara." "Good night," she replied, her voice a whisper as he left. James lay awake in his room, her presence lingering like a melody he couldn't shake. She was changing more than the house, she was changing him, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. The Carver mansion was cloaked in the stillness of a late October night, its corridors dim and silent, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. James Carver paced his office, the glow of his laptop casting sharp shadows across his face. Sleep had eluded him again, his mind a tangle of boardroom deadlines and the enigmatic presence of Amara Johnson, his wife of 2 weeks. The changes she'd brought to the mansion, its newfound order, its quiet warmth unsettled him, not because they were wrong, but because they forced him to see her. See her. And that stirred something he wasn't ready to name. He shut his laptop and wandered downstairs, drawn to the conservatory by a faint light spilling through its glass doors. The room had green ferns and orchids thriving under soft lamps. Amara sat on a cushioned bench, a book in her lap, and her black veil was lighter tonight, almost translucent in the warm glow. She looked up as James entered, her eyes steady through the fabric. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice soft, carrying a trace of familiarity that caught him off guard. "Something like that," James replied, hovering near the door. His hands slipped into his pockets, a habit when he felt exposed. "You..." Amara closed her book, her gloved fingers lingering on its worn cover. "I like the quiet here. It's grounding." She gestured to the bench across from her. "Sit if you want." He hesitated. The weight of their last conversation, her cryptic pawns can become queens, still lingering. But curiosity, or perhaps exhaustion, won out. He sat, the wicker creaking under his weight. The air smelled of earth and blooms, a stark contrast to the sterile boardrooms he lived in. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sound the faint hum of a heater in the corner. James's eyes drifted to the veil, its delicate weave a constant barrier. He'd bitten back the question a dozen times, but tonight it slipped out. "Why do you wear it?" he asked, his voice low, not accusing, but searching. I get that it's your choice, but why? Amara's posture stiffened, just for a moment, then relaxed. She set the book aside, her hands folding in her lap. Do you want to know? Her tone was cautious, but there was an invitation, a crack in her usual reserve. He nodded, leaning forward slightly. Yeah, I do. She breathed, her eyes drifting to the orchids as if gathering strength from them. Growing up, I was constantly watched. She began, her voice steady, but laced with something raw, and not just seen, watched. Judged. My father built the Johnson Group from nothing. A black man in a world that didn't want him to succeed. That spotlight fell on me too. At school, at galas, in boardrooms. My hair, my skin, my voice, everything was dissected. People didn't see Amara. They saw a symbol, a threat, or a curiosity. James listened, his chest tightening. He'd faced scrutiny as Henry Carver's heir, but it was different. His privilege had shielded him in ways he was only now beginning to understand. When I was 20, I pitched a project to a room full of investors. Amara continued, her gaze distant. I'd worked months on it. Data projections, vision. They barely listened. One man asked if I'd considered softening my look to seem more approachable. Another said my accent was distracting. Say. I won them over, but not because of my work. Because I learned to play their game. She paused, her fingers brushing the veil. The veil was my way out. It forced people to hear me, not judge me. I want to focus on what I do, not what I am. The words landed heavily, each a window into a world James had never navigated. He thought of his life, doors opened by his name, face, and whiteness. That's why you keep it on, he said, more to himself than to her. To control how you're seen. Amara nodded, her eyes meeting his. Exactly. It's not about hiding, James. It's about choosing. Her voice softened, almost vulnerable. Does that make sense? He leaned back, processing. Yeah, he said after a moment. It does. But it also stung, exposing his assumptions. He'd seen the veil as a wall, a game, when it was her armor. I didn't think about it like that. You couldn't have, she said, not unkindly. You've never had to. The truth of her words cut deep, and James felt a flicker of shame. He'd been angry at her, the veil, the marriage, but he'd never considered the weight she carried. I'm sorry, he said, the words clumsy but sincere. For pushing. For not getting it. Amara tilted her head, studying him. You're trying, she said, a faint warmth in her tone. That's something. The silence returned, but it was different now. Less heavy, more shared. James glanced at her book, a worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. Good read? He asked, grasping for lighter ground. It's a favorite, she said, her eyes crinkling with what might have been a smile. Janie's story is about finding her voice and her freedom. It's resonant. He nodded, filing that away. I'll have to check it out. He stood, feeling the weight of the moment. Thanks, Amara, for telling me. She rose too, her veil catching the light. Good night, James. He left the conservatory, his steps slow, her words echoing in his mind. He sat on the edge of his bed, back in his room, staring at the pendant from their engagement still untouched on his nightstand. Amara wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was a woman who'd carved her path through a world that tried to define her. And for the first time, James saw his privilege reflected a mirror he couldn't unsee. He lay awake, the mansion's silence no longer oppressive, but alive with possibility. Amara's story had cracked something open in him, not just curiosity, but respect. Maybe even the beginnings of trust. But the veil remained, and with it a question he no longer wanted to force. When would she choose to show him more? For now, he'd wait, and that choice felt like his first real step toward her. The Carver mansion was a fortress of quiet in the early November dawn, its stone walls bathed in the pale light of a foggy morning. James Carver sat in his office, a sleek corner of the east wing, lined with glass and steel, his eyes fixed on a contract that refused to yield. The merger with Apex Media, a critical step to expand Carver Enterprises' streaming platform, was unraveling. Vague clauses, misaligned expectations, and a last-minute demand for renegotiation had pushed the deal to the brink. James rubbed his temples, the weight of his father's legacy pressing harder than ever. Failure wasn't an option, not with the board watching or thousands of jobs on the line. He'd been at it for hours, papers strewn across his desk, coffee gone cold. The numbers were solid, but the language was a minefield too ambiguous, leaving room for Apex to exploit. James cursed under his breath, tossing a pen aside. He was good at this, trained by Henry Carver, to outmaneuver any opponent, but this felt like a trap he couldn't see. A soft knock broke his focus. Amara Johnson stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the hall's dim light. She wore a simple gray dress, her black veil lighter now, its edges catching the glow of his desk lamp. In her hands was a slim folder, its edges worn. "May I?" she asked, her voice calm, almost tentative. James blinked, caught off guard. "It's not a good time," he said, his tone clipped but not hostile. He gestured to the mess on his desk. "This merger is a nightmare." Amara stepped inside anyway, closing the door behind her. "I know," she said, placing the folder on his desk. "I read the proposal. The issue's not the numbers, it's the wording here." She opened the folder, her gloved finger pointing to a paragraph. "This phrase, 'subject to mutual discretion,' is too vague. It's why Apex is stalling. They want leverage." James stared at her, his irritation warring with curiosity. "You read it?" he asked, leaning forward despite himself. "How I asked your assistant for a copy," she said, her eyes meeting his through the veil. "It's my family's legacy too, James. The Johnson Group is tied to this merger as much as Carver Enterprises." He sat back, processing. Amara's involvement in the mansion's management had been one thing, impressive, but contained. This was different. This was his domain, the heart of the empire he'd been groomed to lead. Yet her point was sharp, undeniable. He scanned the clause again, her words clicking into place. She was right. The ambiguity was the problem. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice cautious, testing. "Tighten the phrasing," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Replace 'mutual discretion' with 'defined performance metrics' as outlined in Appendix C. It locks Apex in without room to wiggle. They'll sign if they know you're serious." She paused, then added, "You're close, James. You need clarity." He studied her, the veil no longer a barrier, but a frame for her steady gaze. Her confidence wasn't loud or demanding. It was rooted, like she'd faced rooms like this and won. For a moment, he saw not his father's pawn, but a strategist who could stand toe-to-toe with him. "All right," he said, grabbing a pen. "Let's try it." They worked together for the next hour. Amara sat across from him, and the folder opened between them. She pointed out 2 more clauses that needed sharpening, her logic precise, and her suggestions practical. James typed revisions, his skepticism fading with each edit. By the time they finished, the contract was leaner, stronger, a weapon instead of a liability. He sent it to his legal team with a note to expedite, then leaned back, exhaling. "You're good at this," he said, a grudging respect in his voice. "I've had practice," Amara replied, a faint smile in her tone. She closed the folder, her movements deliberate. The Johnson Group isn't just media, it's strategy. My father taught me early. James nodded, filing that away. Her father, Marcus Johnson, had been a legend like Henry, but where Henry had forged James through pressure, Amara's words hinted at a different kind of mentorship built on trust. The thought stirred a pang of envy he quickly buried. Thanks, he said, meeting her gaze. I didn't expect this. She tilted her head, studying him. She said you didn't expect me, not accusing, but stating a fact. But I'm here, James, whether you like it or not. The words hung between them, a challenge wrapped in truth. He wanted to respond, to push back, but something stopped him. Her honesty, maybe, or the way she held his gaze without flinching. Instead, he nodded, a silent acknowledgement. The next morning, over breakfast in the conservatory, James lingered longer than usual. Amara sat across from him, a cup of tea in her hands, the veil catching the sunlight streaming through the glass. They didn't speak of the merger, but he slid it toward her when a news article about streaming wars flashed on his tablet. What do you think? He asked, his tone casual but curious. She skimmed the headline, her eyes narrowing slightly. They're underestimating the urban market, she said. Streaming's not just about tech, it's about culture. Apex could tap that, but they're too focused on suburbs. Her analysis was sharp, delivered with the same quiet certainty she'd shown in his office. James nodded, a spark of warmth flickering in his chest. It wasn't just her insight, the moment's ease the first time they'd shared something beyond duty. You should sit in on the next call, he said, half joking. Scare them a little. Her eyes crinkled, a hint of a laugh. Maybe I will. She sipped her tea, and for a moment the silence was comfortable, not strained. Later that day, James got word from his team Apex had responded positively to the revised contract, and negotiations were back on track. He should have felt triumphant, but his thoughts drifted to Amara instead. Her input had tipped the scales, and he couldn't deny it. He pulled up the merger files in his office and added her name to the distribution list for future updates. It was a small gesture, but felt significant, a step towards something he wasn't ready to define. As he passed the library that night, he saw Amara reading by the fire, her veil glowing softly. He paused, tempted to join her, but turned away, his heart unsteady. She was no longer just a stranger or a symbol of his father's control. She was Amara, sharp, steady, and undeniably present. And for the first time, James felt the stirrings of something dangerous, not just respect, but a curiosity that bordered on care. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan glittered under a cascade of chandeliers, its marble floors reflecting the swirl of black-tie elegance. The Carver Foundation's annual gala, a beacon of philanthropy, drew New York's elite senators, CEOs, philanthropists, all gathered to support education initiatives in underserved communities. James Carver stood near the bar, a glass of scotch in hand, his tailored tuxedo sharp, but his posture tense. The event was a necessary performance, but it carried an added weight tonight. It was the first public appearance he and Amara Johnson, his wife of a month, would make as a couple. Amara stood beside him, a vision in a floor-length navy gown, its gold embroidery catching the light with every subtle movement. Her black veil, sheer yet concealing, was fastened with a delicate pin, her regal and enigmatic presence. She greeted guests with soft-spoken grace, her gloved hand accepting handshakes, her eyes steady through the fabric. Whispers followed her, curious, speculative, sometimes cruel, but she moved through them like a ship cutting through fog unruffled. James watched her, his chest a mix of admiration and unease. Something had shifted since their late-night talk in the conservatory and their collaboration on the Apex merger. Amara wasn't just a stranger or a duty. She was a partner, and her intelligence and resilience forced him to rethink his assumptions. Yet the veil remained a symbol he now understood as her shield, but one that drew eyes and judgments in a room like this. He hated how it made him feel protective, yes, but also exposed, as if her mystery reflected on him. The evening progressed smoothly with toasts and speeches extolling the foundation's impact. James played his part, shaking hands and offering practiced smiles. Amara stayed close, her presence a quiet anchor. But as the keynote speaker, Senator William Hargrove, a longtime ally of James's late father Henry, took the stage, the air shifted. Hargrove, a silver-haired patrician with a commanding drawl, began with platitudes about charity, then veered into dangerous territory. In times like these, he said, his eyes flicking toward James's table, we must guard against facades. Not every alliance is built on trust, and not every mask hides a noble heart. A ripple of laughter, sharp and knowing, spread through the crowd. James's grip tightened on his glass, his pulse quickening. Hargrove pressed on, a smirk playing at his lips. Progress demands clarity. One wonders if certain traditions, like seeing a partner's face, are worth preserving. The room stilled, the laughter replaced by a tense murmur. James felt heat rise in his chest, a fury he hadn't known was there. Hargrove's words weren't just a jab at Amara. They were an attack on her dignity, her choice, and by extension on him. He glanced at Amara, expecting anger, but her posture was unchanged. Her hands folded calmly in her lap. Her eyes, though, met his, and in them he saw not pain, but a quiet strength, as if she'd faced this before and would again. That was enough. James stood his chair, scraping softly, the motion commanding attention. The room hushed as he crossed to the stage, each step deliberate, his face a mask of controlled rage. Hargrove paused, his smirk faltering. James took the microphone, his voice low but edged with steel. I wasn't aware, he said, that this evening was about insulting my wife under the guise of tradition. Gasps rose from the crowd, cameras flashing. Hargrove blinked, flustered. I meant no offense. You meant exactly what you said. James cut in, his gaze sweeping the room. My wife's dignity outshines your prejudice, Senator. Her veil isn't a mask. It's a mirror, reflecting the limitations of anyone who can't see past it. Amara has more honor, intelligence, and courage than most in this room, myself included. If her choice makes you uncomfortable, that's your failing, not hers. The silence was absolute, the air crackling with shock. James turned to Amara, his eyes softening. She hadn't moved, but her fingers curled slightly on the table, a subtle sign of tension. He stepped off the stage, extended his hand to her, and asked, "Shall we?" She rose, slipping her hand into his, her touch light but firm. Together they walked out, the crowd parting instinctively, murmurs trailing them like smoke. Outside, in the cool November air, James exhaled, his shoulders sagging. The valet hurried to fetch their car, leaving them alone on the steps. I'm sorry, he said, turning to Amara. I didn't mean to make a scene. Her eyes, visible through the veil, studied him. She said you didn't have to do that. Her voice quiet but warm. I've heard worse. That's why I did it, he replied, his voice raw. You shouldn't have to hear it again, not because of me. She tilted her head, a faint crinkle at her eyes suggesting a smile. You saw me, she said. That matters. The words landed softly, but carried a weight that made his chest ache. He'd acted on instinct, driven by a need to protect her. But her response made him realize it was more than duty. He saw her, not just the veil, but the woman beneath, the one who'd reshaped his home, saved his merger, and shared her pain in the conservatory. The car pulled up, and they slid into the back seat, the city lights blurring past as they rode silently, her hand resting near his. Back at the mansion, in the privacy of their suite, James loosened his tie, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Amara stood by the window, her veil glowing in the moonlight. "You're not angry?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She turned her gaze steady. Surprised, she admitted, "But I'm not angry. You meant what you said up there." "I did," he said, stepping closer. "I don't know everything about you, Amara, but I know you don't deserve their judgment. Or mine." Her fingers brushed the veil, a small, unconscious gesture. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She paused, then added, "Good night, James." "Good night," he replied, watching her retreat to her side of the suite. As he lay on the chaise, the fire's glow fading, he replayed the gala, the senator's smirk, the crowd's silence, Amara's quiet strength. He'd defended her, not just for her, but for himself, for the man he was becoming with her. And though the veil remained, the distance between them felt smaller, a gap he no longer resented, but hoped to bridge. The morning after the Waldorf Astoria Gala, the Carver mansion felt like a fortress under siege. Outside its wrought iron gates, news vans lined the quiet upstate road, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters clutching microphones and speculating into cameras. James Carver sat inside his office. The blinds were drawn, his phone buzzing relentlessly with notifications. Headlines screamed across every outlet: "Billionaire defends veiled bride in fiery gala clash. Carver's stand courage or controversy." Social media was a battlefield. Some praised his defense of Amara Johnson as a bold stand against prejudice. In contrast, others sneered, calling it a publicity stunt, or questioning what his mysterious wife was hiding. The world had seen James's outburst, and it wasn't letting go. He scrolled through a news site, his jaw tight. One article quoted Senator Hargrove's flustered response, "A misunderstanding, nothing more." Another ran a blurry photo of Amara, her navy gown shimmering her veil, a dark frame around her unseen face. The caption read, "Who is Amara Johnson? The woman behind the veil." James slammed his phone down, the sound echoing in the silent room. He'd acted on instinct last night, driven by fury at Hargrove's cruelty. But now the fallout was inescapable. He'd made Amara a spectacle, the thing she'd shielded herself against. The door creaked open, and Amara entered, her silhouette framed by the hall's soft light. She wore a simple black sweater and skirt, her veil as ever present, though its fabric seemed thinner today, catching the glow of a nearby lamp. In her hand was a tablet, its screen dim. She said, "You've seen the news," her voice calm, almost resigned. James stood, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," he said, his tone heavy. "I'm sorry, Amara. I didn't mean to drag you into this circus." She crossed to the desk, setting the tablet down. "She said you didn't drag me." Her eyes met him through the veil. "I've been here before. Headlines whisper speculation. It's not new." Her words were steady, but a trace of weariness made his chest ache. He said that doesn't make it right, pacing to the window. He parted the blinds, glimpsing a reporter adjusting her earpiece. "They're tearing you apart out there, and it's my fault. I should have kept my mouth shut." Amara tilted her head, studying him. "You think silence would have stopped them?" she asked, a faint edge of challenge in her voice. "They'd have found something else to chew on." "At least you said something worth hearing." He turned, surprised. "You're not mad?" "Mad?" She paused, considering. "No, I was caught off guard. But what you did meant something to me." Her voice softened, and for a moment the veil seemed less a barrier and more a frame for her quiet strength. James sank into his chair, the fight draining out of him. "I don't know how you do it," he admitted. "The way they talk, the way they look at you. It'd drive me crazy." "I've had practice," she said, dry humor in her tone. She sat across from him, her hands folded. "Growing up in my father's world, I learned early that people see what they want. The veil makes them admit it." Her words echoed their conservatory talk, her story of being judged for her skin voice and existence. James leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "Does it ever get to you?" he asked, his voice low. "What do they say?" She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the tablet. Sometimes she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't let it define me. I can't." The honesty in her words hit him hard, stirring a mix of admiration and guilt. He'd been so consumed by his anger at his father at the marriage at the Vale that he'd barely considered the weight she carried. He said, "You're stronger than I am," surprising himself with the admission. Amara's eyes crinkled slightly, a hint of a smile. "Or just more stubborn," she said, lightening the moment. She stood, picking up the tablet. "Let them talk, James. They'll move on to the next story soon enough." As she left, her words lingered, but so did the unease in James's chest. He opened his phone again, skimming comments under a viral speech clip. He's protecting her secrets. She's playing him. What's she hiding? The venom in the words fueled a protective instinct he hadn't known he had. But beneath it was something more profound, a question he couldn't shake. Was he defending Amara or fighting to prove something to himself? That afternoon, alone in the library, James sat by the fire, a glass of bourbon untouched. The room, once his father's sanctuary, felt different now, its shelves gleaming under Amara's care. He thought of Henry Carver, who'd shaped him with cold precision, never asking what James wanted. Duty had been his mantra. Love is a weakness. James had followed that path, building walls around his heart, but Amara was dismantling them, not with force, but with her quiet resilience. He remembered their first meeting, her steady gaze through the veil, her refusal to bend under his skepticism. Their late-night talks, her sharp mind saving his merger, her life story, under scrutiny. Each moment had chipped away at his resistance, revealing a woman he was beginning to need, not just as a partner, but as someone who saw him too. The realization scared him. Vulnerability wasn't part of Henry's playbook, and James had spent his life avoiding it. But with Amara, it felt inevitable. He stood, crossing to a framed photo of Henry on the mantel. "You planned this," he muttered, his voice low. "But you didn't prepare for her." Henry's stern face offered no answer, and for the first time, James felt a flicker of freedom, not from his father's legacy, but from the fear of failing it. That evening at dinner in the conservatory, James and Amara sat across from each other, the glass walls framing a starry sky. She sipped tea, her veil catching the candlelight. "The board called," he said, breaking the silence. "The press rattles them, but they liked the speech. Said it showed leadership." She raised a brow, her tone dry. "Leadership or drama?" He chuckled, the sound surprising him. "Both, probably." He paused, then added, "I meant it, though, every word." Her eyes met his, soft but searching. "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." The moment stretched, a quiet understanding settling between them. James felt the distance shrink, not gone, but smaller, a space he wanted to cross. He didn't push, though. Amara's strength and choice deserved his patience. As they cleared the table together, their hands brushing briefly, he knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, he was in it with her, not just for duty, but for something real. Dưới đây là phần 10 của câu chuyện, được viết với độ dài khoảng 5.000 ký tự, bao gồm dấu cách tiếp nối các phần 1, pa 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 và 9 đã cung cấp. Phần này giữ nguyên tinh thần và nội dung chính của câu chuyện gốc, tập trung vào khoảnh khắc Amara Johnson bổ khăn voan tại một gala mùa đông, đánh dấu sự công nhận công khai về giá trị của cô và bước ngoặt trong mối quan hệ với James Carver. Nội dung được xây dựng để đảm bảo kịch tính hấp dẫn và phù hợp với bối cảnh đã thay đổi. James là người Mỹ da trắng, Amara là người Mỹ da đen, bối cảnh ở New York. Các yếu tố thua mô tả cảnh vật dài dòng lặp lại về sự bí ẩn của Amara được loại bỏ và các yếu tố thiếu phản ứng xã hội sự phát triển tình cảm tinh tế chiều sâu của Amara được bổ sung để tăng chiều sâu. The Carver Mansion's ballroom glowed with the warmth of a winter gala. Its high ceilings, adorned with strings of golden lights and wreaths of crimson and cream florals. The Carver Foundation's December event, celebrating the expansion of its education programs, drew a crowd of dignitaries, artists, and community leaders. James Carver stood beneath the grand staircase, greeting guests with a practiced smile, his black tuxedo sharp against the festive backdrop. Yet his eyes drifted to the clock, then to the stairs where Amara Johnson, his wife, had yet to appear. The past month had been a quiet transformation. Since the Waldorf Gala, where James had defended Amara against Senator Hargrove's mockery, their relationship had deepened, not in grand gestures, but in small, steady moments. She shared breakfasts and late-night talks about the foundation's goals, her hand brushing his as they reviewed reports. Amara's insight had shaped the gala's focus on mentorship for young women, and James had insisted she be recognized tonight. She'd demurred, saying, "Let the work speak first." He respected her choice, but the anticipation of her presence tonight stirred something new: pride. Yes, but also a longing to stand beside her fully seen. The room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the air rich with the scent of cedar and champagne. James glanced at the stairs again, his heart quickening. Then the crowd's murmur softened, heads turning as a collective breath caught in the air. Amara descended unveiled for the first time, a vision in a deep emerald gown that hugged her frame with subtle elegance. Her warm brown skin glowed under the lights, her high cheekbones and full lips serene, her gray eyes, those steady, unwavering eyes, holding the room captive. Her hair, a cascade of tight curls, framed her face like a crown. She moved with a calm birth of choice, not vanity. Each step a quiet declaration. James froze, his breath catching. He'd known she was beautiful. Her grace, her strength had told him that. But seeing her now unshielded was a revelation. Not because of her appearance, but because it was her wholly herself choosing this moment. The crowd parted as she reached him, her eyes locking with his. "Why now?" He whispered, his voice low, meant only for her. "Because we're ready," she replied, her tone soft but confident, a smile flickering on her lips. She turned to the crowd, her presence commanding without effort. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear, resonant, filling the room. "Many of you have wondered about my veil and why I chose to wear it. Some thought it was a shame secrecy or something to hide. But the truth is more straightforward. I wanted to be seen for what I do believe and what I build, not for how I look." The room was silent, reverent, hanging on her words. In a world quick to judge appearances, I offered a different introduction. Tonight, I thank those who looked deeper and saw our work together. Her gaze flicked to James, a warmth that made his chest swell. He stepped beside her, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I see you," he said quietly, "for her alone. I always have." The crowd erupted in applause, genuine, and sustained, the sound washing over them like a wave. Amara nodded, her poise unbroken, but her hand brushed James's, a fleeting touch that grounded him. The rest of the evening unfolded with a joyful ease. Amara moved through the room, no longer a mystery, but a force. Guests approached respectfully, asking about her mentorship program and sharing stories of its impact. Those who'd once whispered now listened, humbled by her authenticity. James stayed close, his eyes rarely leaving her. He saw the way she listened, the way she connected, the way her laugh, rare but bright, lit the room. At one point, a young woman, a scholarship recipient, thanked Amara tearfully for her guidance. Amara hugged her, whispering something that made the girl smile. James felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of awe. This was the woman he'd married, not for duty, but for something he was beginning to name. Later on the balcony overlooking the snow-dusted grounds they stood together, the cold air sharp against the warmth of their closeness. "You were right," James said, his voice soft. "They needed to see the work first." Amara leaned against the railing, her eyes reflecting the starlit sky. "And now they'll see everything else," she said, a quiet confidence in her tone. She turned to him, her face open, unguarded. "Thank you, James, for waiting." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "I didn't wait because I had to," he said. "I stayed because I wanted to know you, all of you." He paused, then added, "And I'm glad I did." Her smile was small but radiant, and for a moment they stood in silence, the snow falling softly around them. James felt the weight of the past months, his anger, his doubt, his father's shadow, lift replaced by something lighter, something real. Amara wasn't just his wife. She was his partner, his equal, someone he'd chosen in a way Henry Carver could never have planned. As they returned to the ballroom hand in hand, the crowd's warmth enveloped them. The gala ended with a toast to the foundation's future, but for James it was a toast to theirs, a future not dictated by contracts or veils, but by trust, respect, and the promise of something more profound. The night stretched on, and as they danced her hand in his, James knew this was no longer an arrangement. It was a beginning. Winter's grip softened as January draped the Carver mansion in a quiet hush, the snow outside melting into rivulets that sparkled under the pale sun. Inside, the estate buzzed with a new rhythm shaped by James Carver and Amara Johnson, no longer strangers bound by a contract, but partners forging something real. The gala, where Amara unveiled her face, had shifted the world's gaze. Headlines now praised her poise, her vision for the Carver Foundation's mentorship program, and her role in redefining the Carver legacy. Yet for James, the actual change was private, woven into the moments they shared when the cameras were gone. Mornings began with a ritual. They'd stumbled into coffee brewed by James in the mansion's sleek kitchen, the aroma filling the air as Amara joined him at the breakfast nook. She wore no veil, now her face open, her curls often tucked into a loose bun, her gray eyes bright with a warmth that made James's heart skip. They'd talk sometimes about the Foundation's latest projects, sometimes about nothing, like the jazz playlist she'd introduced him to, or his rediscovered love for old detective novels. One morning, as he handed her a mug, their fingers brushed, and she smiled, a slight, unguarded curve that felt like a gift. "You're getting better at this?" she teased, sipping the coffee. "It's less like motor oil today." He chuckled, leaning against the counter, high praise from a tea snob. The moment's ease, so foreign months ago, was now precious. He'd spent his life guarding his heart, shaped by Henry Carver's cold lessons. But Amara's presence, her laugh, insight, quiet strength was unraveling those defenses. Their bond deepened beyond the kitchen. Amara had taken a formal role in the foundation, championing a scholarship fund for students from underserved communities. Her vision was clear. The opportunity wasn't just money, mentorship, access, and belief. James watched her pitch the program to donors in the mansion's library, her voice steady, her data sharp, her passion infectious. When a skeptical investor questioned the fund's scalability, Amara countered with a story of a Harlem teen she'd mentored, now thriving at Columbia. The room fell silent, then nodded in agreement. James, standing by the door, felt a surge of pride. She wasn't just his wife. She was a force. At home, they found joy in the ordinary. One evening, they cooked together a messy attempt at Amara's grandmother's gumbo recipe. The kitchen filled with laughter as James fumbled with okra, Amara nudging him aside to stir the pot. "You're hopeless," she said, but her eyes sparkled. As they sat to eat, the spicy warmth of the dish, mingling with their shared stories, James realized the mansion no longer felt like Henry's monument. It was their home, yet the past lingered. One night in the study, James found himself staring at a photo of his father Henry's stern gaze, a reminder of the man who'd orchestrated their marriage. Amara entered, carrying 2 mugs of her favorite chamomile tea. "You look troubled," she said, setting a mug before him. He sighed, gesturing to the photo. "He planned everything. My life, this marriage. I keep wondering if I'm still following his script, or if this," he motioned between them, "is ours." Amara sat across from him, her gaze thoughtful. "It's ours," she said firmly. "Henry may have set the stage, but we chose what to build on it. You decided to see me, James. That wasn't his doing." Her words cut through his doubt, grounding him. He reached for her hand, her fingers warm against his. "You make it sound simple," he said, a half-smile forming. "It's not," she admitted, squeezing his hand, "but it's worth it." Their professional partnership grew as seamlessly as their one. When a new merger proposal with a tech startup faltered over cultural missteps, Amara suggested hosting the executives at the mansion, not in a boardroom, but at their table. She planned the evening precisely, a menu blending Southern and New York flavors, music from a local jazz trio, and a setting in the conservatory, where glass walls framed the winter stars. James watched her charm the executives, her questions about their vision, disarming their skepticism. By dessert, they were laughing, signing preliminary agreements. Later, alone in the hall, he pulled her close. "You're incredible," he whispered. "I'm practical," she corrected, but her smile betrayed her warmth. The press, once ravenous, now painted Amara as a trailblazer, her story inspiring think pieces on identity and leadership. Social media buzzed with support, with young women posting photos with hashtags like #See Beyond the Veil. Yet Amara remained unfazed, her focus on the work. When James asked how she handled the spotlight, she shrugged. "I've always been watched," she said. "Now they're seeing what I want them to." One evening, as they walked the mansion's grounds, the crunch of snow underfoot, James stopped, turning to her. "I married you for duty," he said, his voice low. "But I'm staying for you, Amara. For us." Her eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold air. "I stayed for you too," she said, her hand finding his. "For the man you're becoming." They stood there, the stars above, a silent witness to a bond forged not by force, but by choice. James knew the road ahead wasn't perfect. Mergers would falter. The world would judge, but with Amara, he felt ready. The mansion, once a cage, was now a foundation. And together, they were building something Henry could never have envisioned, a life rooted in love, trust, and purpose. Spring breathed new life into the Carver mansion, its grounds bursting with blooms of lilac and cherry blossoms, the air sweet with the promise of renewal. Inside, the estate pulsed with a warmth that had once been absent, reflecting the bond between James Carver and Amara Johnson. No longer bound by the cold dictates of Henry Carver's will, they had forged a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and a love that had grown from shared trials and quiet moments. As March unfolded, their lives intertwined seamlessly, a tapestry of work, laughter, and unspoken promises. Thanks to Amara's vision, the Carver Foundation has become a beacon of change. Its mentorship program for young women is now a national model. Her scholarship fund had sent dozens of students to college, their letters of gratitude lining the walls of her office. Once driven by duty alone, James found purpose in amplifying her work, his strategic mind complementing her passion. Together, they launched a series of community forums on ethical business challenging corporations to prioritize people over profit. The press lauded their partnership with headlines like Carver and Johnson, redefined power couple, and social media buzzing with admiration for Amara's grace and James's evolution. Yet their most authentic moments were private. One Sunday morning, they sat in the mansion's kitchen sunlight, streaming through the windows, a chessboard between them. Amara moved her knight, her curls loose, her smile teasing. "You're distracted," she said, her gray eyes sparkling. James leaned back, feigning offense. "I'm strategizing." He moved a pawn only for her to capture it swiftly. He laughed the sound free, in a way it hadn't been before. "You're ruthless." "Only on the board," she quipped, sipping her tea. These moments playing chess, cooking late-night dinners, sharing stories of their pasts, had become their foundation. James spoke of his boarding school days and the loneliness of being Henry's heir. Amara shared memories of Harlem summers, her grandmother's wisdom shaping her resilience. Each story wove them closer, a bridge over the chasm of their arranged beginning. Their professional synergy peaked at a Carver Enterprises board meeting in mid-March. The room, a sleek expanse of glass and mahogany, hummed with anticipation as James stood at the head of the table, Amara beside him. The agenda covered a landmark merger with a renewable energy firm, a deal Amara had helped refine with her sharp cultural insights. But James had another announcement. "Before we close," he said, his voice steady, "I want to acknowledge someone who's reshaped this company and me." He turned to Amara, his eyes warm. "Amara Johnson isn't just my wife or an advisor. Her vision, clarity, and commitment to values over profit have made us stronger and better. As of today, she joins our executive board not as a courtesy, but as a leader we need." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause, genuine and sustained. Amara stood, her emerald blazer sharp, her presence commanding. "I'm honored," she said, her voice clear. "Not for the title, but for what we can build. My role is to challenge, question, and protect what matters, our integrity and impact. Let's make that our legacy." Board members nodded, and some visibly moved. Later, as they walked through the building's lobby, hand in hand, James turned to her. "You were perfect," he said, his voice low. "I was honest," she replied, her smile soft. "That's enough." That evening they stood on the mansion's balcony, the city skyline twinkling in the distance, the air cool against their skin. James wrapped an arm around Amara, pulling her close. "I never thought we'd end up here," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "When I met you, I saw a contract, a cage. Now, I see everything." Amara leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "Neither did I," she said. "But we chose this, James. We made it ours." He kissed her forehead, the gesture tender, unguarded. "Why did you stay?" he asked, echoing a question from months ago. "Really?" She looked up, her eyes reflecting the stars. "Because I saw you," she said. "Not the heir, not the name, the man who could learn and love. And I wanted to build something with him." Her words settled over him, a balm for the wounds of his past. He thought of Henry, the man who'd shaped him with control, not care. James had once feared becoming him, but Amara had shown him another path, one of partnership, purpose, and vulnerability. "No matter what comes next," he said, his voice steady, "I'm ready as long as it's with you." Together, she replied, her hand finding his, their fingers entwining. The night stretched around them, the mansion's lights glowing below, a testament to the home they'd created. The world would keep watching. Mergers would rise and fall. Headlines would fade. But here, in this quiet moment, they were enough. As spring deepened, their work continued. They traveled to Chicago for a foundation summit, and to Nairobi for a tech partnership, each trip strengthening their bond. They argued sometimes, their strong wills clashing, but those moments sharpened them, clarifying their shared vision. At home, they collected small joys. Amara's growing tea collection, James's shelf of vintage books, their late-night dances in the ballroom, and her jazz records. Once a cold monument, the Carver mansion was now a living legacy, its halls filled with laughter, purpose, and love. James and Amara stood at its heart, no longer pawns in a game, but architects of a future they'd chosen. Under a canopy of stars, they faced the world together, their hands clasped, their hearts aligned, ready for whatever lay ahead.